Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us today. So here is a problem with eating low carb. You make a great low carb dip or soup, but you can't have chips, and there are very few crackers, and the ones that there are pretty expensive. So here's my solution. I got out my big old canister of CarbQuick and whipped out some bread crisp. I had no idea how these were going to turn out. This was a total experiment, and I'm really happy I made them. Before I show this experiment, if you will, give us a thumbs up, and I'd love it if you'd subscribe, and if you click the little bell icon at the top right, you'll get a notice when I post new videos. If you're not familiar with CarbQuick, it is a low-carb baking mix. It is flour-based, but it's mostly fiber. 6 grams of carbs, net carbs, per cup. And it gives more of a bread texture than if you use almond flour or some other substitute. I'll tell you where to get it in the info section. Now, as I said, this is a total experiment, but I'm thinking because I want to fry these and I want them to stay together, I need to add a little wheat gluten to it. Gluten is what makes bread kind of sticky and stick together. It gives a lot of the texture. I'm going to use a little salt, a little onion powder, and a little garlic powder. And if this works out, I may try other seasonings. And an egg. And this is an extra large egg. Now I'm only going to measure out a half cup of this CarbQuick now. I always run my CarbQuick through the food processor. I'll do 4 or 5 cups at a time and then use it because you can't sift it. So that is, and I failed to mention, a teaspoonful of baking powder. And that will all be listed, all the ingredients will be listed in the info section. And then I'm going to add a tablespoonful of the Vital Wheat gluten. This is something that most folks don't keep on hand. But if you're using, making bread or using low carb flours, Vital Wheat gluten kind of helps it stick together a little bit better and gives it a little bit better texture. Reacts more with the leavening that you've put in it. And then I'm going to add a 1/4 teaspoonful of garlic powder, and I'm going to add a 1/4 teaspoonful of onion powder. And as I say, I'm just playing with these right now, trying to figure out what will taste the best. I think next time I'm going to add some finely grated Parmesan. That's the onion powder. And I'm going to put just a pinch of salt. CarbQuick has a little salt on its own, but it needs just a little bit more. So I'm just going to, maybe 1/8 of a teaspoonful. This is a 1/4 teaspoon measurer. And we'll just mix that together with a fork. If I were using flour, I would have sifted it all together, but as I say, CarbQuick does not sift well. It's not as fine as flour, has a much coarser texture. Even though I did run this through the food processor, it's still difficult to sift, so just make sure you mix it really, really well. Now, I'm going to beat in this egg, and as I say, it's an extra large egg. I'm going to have to add some more flour to get the right texture. I don't know how much yet, and I will list it when we figure out how much, but it's going to vary based on the size of your egg. You could use a large or an extra large. I don't think a medium egg would be enough to get the texture that you want. So I'm just mixing that up. And my thought process in this, by the way, is that I'm sort of making noodle. I'm thinking I would like to have something close to a fried noodle at the end of this. And it is CarbQuick, and it's different than flour, and it won't be exactly a fried noodle. But that's sort of what I have in my mind. And I'll see how close we get to that. So just mixing it up. Now the egg is the only moisture we're going to use. We're not going to add any water or milk or anything like that. So you see that's fairly firm, which is why I say I think a medium egg for this amount would not be enough. You know, if you're making pasta, you usually use 2 eggs to 1 cup of flour. And since I had a 1/2 cup flour, that's how I decided to use 1 egg. So I'm just mixing that all together. Now another property of CarbQuick is that it rehydrates more slowly than flour. I don't know why, that's just how it's made. And it takes a little bit longer, so whoops, sorry, bumped my camera. So I want to rehydrate this, and I'm going to let it just sit for a few minutes. I'll put a plate on top just to keep it covered. And I just let it rest like that for about 15 to 20 minutes, and it'll rehydrate better that way. So I'm going to keep track of how much of the CarbQuick I'm using to knead this and to work it together. And that's 2 tablespoons full. 1 ounce by volume. And I'm going to dip my hands in and just put this. I'm sorry my camera's off whack. You know, I do all this by myself. I don't have a camera person. And sometimes it just gets a little off center. There, that's better. So I'm going to flour my hands with CarbQuick pretty well. And then I'm going to knead this for a couple of minutes. One of the things to hold in mind if you're using CarbQuick is that it's not flour. If you were making biscuits and you were using flour and you were making biscuits or pie crust, I would warn you against kneading too much, because then you would lose your flakiness. This is not flour. I know it's a flour-based product, but it's not flour. And you can just, I have found in using this over the last few months that the more you knead it and work it, the better texture you get. It just reacts well to it. So I'm going to knead this for about 3 minutes. You don't have to watch the whole process. I'll be back. So I've been doing this for about 3 minutes, and I'm going to show you where we are with this. I've worked in almost all of that 2 tablespoons full of flour. And I kind of want you to see the texture I've got here. This is a very malleable dough. It feels almost like Play-Doh. It's about that texture. It's not at all elastic. It just did not develop any elasticity like you would be looking for if you were making spaghetti. And it might have developed a little bit more if I had put water in it. I think I need 1 more tablespoonful of flour because it still feels just a little bit sticky, a little tacky as I'm working it. It sticks to my hands just a little bit. See, no elasticity at all. If you were making noodles, if you were making pasta, you would work it until it was elastic. This is never going to get elastic. I've been working this pretty hard for about 4 minutes, and it's developed none of it. So I'm going to stop looking for that. That's why you do kitchen experiments, to see what happens. So I'm going to form this into a ball, and then we're going to let it have another little rest period. Just right here on the counter. I'll turn the bowl over it. Be back in about 30 minutes. And we're going to see what we have after about 30 minutes rest period. And I'll tell you, it's still not elastic. Maybe just a little bit more. So I'm just going to go with what we've got here. And I've decided that what I want to do is about 1-inch squares, just to make little cracker-like things. I might try a little bit bigger piece and see how that works. When you're working with flour alternatives, one of the reasons I went through all of this kneading and resting is because sometimes they don't stay together when you drop them in the oil or in the water, according to how you're doing them. And sometimes the size matters. So I'm going to start out with small ones. If this works, and you can see from the beginning that it actually did work, we already know now it works because I'm narrating after the fact. But my thought at the time was, assuming this works, I will experiment with different shapes and sizes and flavors. I wish I had put Parmesan cheese in these, because I think it'll be so good. And next time I'll add some Parmesan cheese. So I'm just going to roll this out really thin, because one of the things I want is crunch. And I am going to fry these, but sometime later I'll see how they work baked. And I'm going to put just enough of the CarbQuick on this to make sure it's not sticky and doesn't stick to my rolling pin. And I'm going to roll it just as thin as I can. And then I'm just going to use my little bench scraper here to square this off. And that's probably not necessary. You could cut little circles or you could cut little wedges. And I doubt it matters if it's smooth on the edges or not. But I want to try little square wedges, little square crackers. See, if there's any elasticity, it's too little to even notice. So I'm going to cut these approximately 1 inch square. Just using the bench scraper. Now I have a cast iron skillet on the stove, and I'm heating it to medium heat. So what we're going to get here is, I think I'm going to end up with 20 of these little crackers, and then I'll make some more with this little extra. So, I don't know how many of these you'll call a serving, but I'll give you a kind of a rough rundown on the carbs in this in a minute. Right now I'm going to get my pan ready on the stove. And I'll leave this little bit here. I'll do something with that later. And I'll meet you at the stove. So in my little fry pan, my little cast iron pan here, I have, about a 1/4 inch of oil. And I dropped a little piece in. That was kind of slow to sizzle, so I'm going to let it heat for another, minute or so before I actually put my little crisp in. And while we're waiting for that, I'll tell you about the carb count. The CarbQuick, here we go. I'm going to be dropping them in. The CarbQuick has 3 grams of carbs for that 1/2 cup, and then a little bit more for the 2 tablespoons we added, less than 1 more gram total. So we're going to be generous and call it 4 grams of carbs. And the egg is about 1 gram. The yolk is about 1 gram. There's not any in the vital wheat gluten, so there you go. What have we got here? 5 grams of carbs. And however many we get, however many you eat, you can figure your carb intake from that. Now I'm dropping these in one at a time because I don't want to take the temp down. You can see how thin they are. And I set my timer for 30 seconds. And I don't actually think I'm going to need 30 seconds. My heat wasn't fully up to medium heat. But they're sizzling pretty nicely. And they float right from the top, from the beginning. So you want to do it to leave them in there until you see some browning around the edges. Like that one. Oh look, that looks pretty nice. So it wasn't even 30 seconds, it was maybe 20. Flip it over. Probably could have put more in here. It's an experiment. So maybe about another 15 seconds. I'll just leave the camera on so you can tell about how long this takes. I've really loved experimenting with this CarbQuick, by the way. I will give you a warning on the amount of CarbQuick you choose to eat. It has a lot of fiber, and only you can determine how fiber affects you. So I maybe use it twice a week because it can cause some digestive upset if you eat it too often. And that's it. Look at that. Those look really nice. I bet they would bake well too. I just don't know yet, but I'm going to experiment with that too. I'm going to take these out. My oil is getting a little bit hotter, and I'm going to cook the rest of them and see how they turn out in a little bit hotter oil. I'll be right back. So I've done the second batch, and I'll let you see this one. These cook in about 10 seconds at the little bit higher temperature. And of course they're so thin, they're done all the way through. I did go back and roll out the little trimmings because I wanted to see how a bigger one would cook. And so I've got a nice chip size there. And dropped it in the oil. I've got another one here. I'm flattening it just a little bit more. And you see they're puffing up pretty nicely and they're staying together. So for future reference, you can make the bigger ones for a bowl of dip. And I'll see how long it takes them to cook. You can see this goes really quickly. And you know, I'm even thinking you could sprinkle them with some Splenda or some monk fruit, something like that, and have a nice little sweet chip. Oh, look at that. That's pretty. Yep. Okay, I'm keeping this recipe. I'm going to plate up a few chips and some dip, and I'll show you what I got. You know, that makes a nice little presentation there. They're a little crispy, a little crunchy, a little brown around the edges. Now let's see how they work. I've got some salsa and I've got some ranch dip. And I'm going to give these a try with the ranch dip first. Yes, I would say that's some good crunch there. I'm going to call this experiment a success and a good start because I can just think of all kinds of things I can do in making these crispy, crunchy, tasty little bread chips, bread crisp. I really, really hope you try this. I really hope you like it. I know you will. And I hope to see you again tomorrow on Debbie's Back Porch.